Hi, I'm Brenda. I'm a grandmother of 14 grandchildren, and today we're going to make sourdough bread. It can be intimidating, but we're going to break down the steps so that you can see how easy it really is. We're going to start with the starter. I actually made this starter. It's many years old. I've heard of starter being up to like 100 years old or more, kept in the family. So the first thing we're going to do is take the lid off. And we're going to stir it. You can see it's all bubbly and it's a very happy, healthy starter when it's bubbly like that. So we're going to give it a little stir. Then I'm going to put a half a cup into my mixing pitcher. And the way we feed starter, and by the way, starter is just another name for yeast. It's a wild fermented yeast product that makes our bread rise. And when we're finished, we're going to put this half cup back in, but we're going to have enough, 1 cup, to make our bread with. So I'm going to start by adding warm water. Now you want water that's not hot. If it burns you, it's going to kill the yeast. So that's how you gauge it. And then I just add a little bit of water. And I start with my flour. This is actually rye flour. It's sprouted rye flour. And just like with our bodies that like whole foods, starter likes whole foods. If we gave our starter bleached flour in a few months, it wouldn't be as happy as it's going to be because we're giving it whole foods. So it's a living organism. It picks up the healthy bacteria in your kitchen and it becomes very individualized. So if I gave some of this to somebody, in a few months their starter would be a totally different culture than what's here in my kitchen. So that's kind of neat. So I just mix this to the point it's like runny pancake batter. I add a little this, a little that. I seldom use the whole cup of water, but you could. Now when we're finished with this, we're going to let this rest for about 4 to 8 hours. Sometimes I'll feed the starter before I go to bed. The next morning it's ready to make a loaf of bread. Mix it up. So I think that's pretty good. Now we're going to pour out of this into this jar 1 cup for our bread. And when this rests, it's going to be eating and getting strong. It's going to grow just like us. When we eat, we grow. So that looks about right. And then the rest of this will go back into the jar. Don't worry if you make a mess. It's part of life. Life isn't perfect. Have you noticed that? Bread making is a metaphor for life because we learn in our bread making not to be attached to outcome. Mistakes happen. It tastes great though, no matter what it looks like. So now we're ready to do our second step, which I call mixing the bread together. We've already fed our starter. I actually fed this last night. And when you feed the starter, you want to leave the lid askew so that a lot of air and healthy bacteria can get into the starter while it's eating the rye flour that we fed it. I've already added honey. Honey is an optional ingredient. If you're making pizza dough, you won't want honey. The honey I like to use is raw, unfiltered honey. If we're going to the process of making sourdough bread, we want to give healthy food for our family and friends. Keep it even healthier, more nutritious by using raw, unfiltered honey. I have water, 1.5 cups of water. Now this water I've heated is filtered water once again. We don't want anything with chlorine that might kill our yeast. And this can be nice and hot. This might even be a little too hot to your skin because it'll melt the honey and it also makes our batter nice and warm, and yeast loves warmth. So it'll rise nicely because the batter will actually be nice and soft and warm when we put it on our board. So once the honey is dissolved, I start adding flour. And again, we want this to be about the consistency of runny pancake batter. The flour I like to use is King Arthur bread flour. And I like it because it's never bromated and never bleached. So in order to have the healthiest end product, I like to put healthy ingredients into the bread. I find about 4 scoops is right. And again, I don't measure this, and you don't need to either. So we just, if you're in doubt, just add a little less, and you can always add more. So I wanted to also mention, this is a Danish whisk. I find it to be a very helpful tool for mixing my bread. I wasn't familiar with this whisk until I started making bread many years ago, and I never make bread without it now. So you can see that's a nice thick consistency. This whisk is nice because it takes the flour off the sides of the bowl. At the same time, it's getting the lumps out. All right, so now we can add the starter. So one thing you want to do is make sure you get all the starter out, because again, that's what's going to make your bread rise. Any that's left in your jar is not going to help in the process, is it? So this is like gold when you're making sourdough bread. You don't want to lose the gold. So then we mix the starter in. Again, this Danish whisk is awesome. The Danes know what they're doing, I'll tell you that. And once that's good, we're ready to add the salt. So salt is something I do measure along with the water. Everything else is just by feel and look. So we're going to add a little blanket of flour on top of our starter. Why are we doing that? Good question. We want to protect the starter from the salt, because salt can kill our starter. So we're going to add 2 teaspoons of salt. I use sea salt. So we sprinkle it around so it's not a big glob of salt anywhere when we start stirring. And then just for added measure, just for safety, I add a little more flour on top. And this isn't necessarily something you must do. As you start researching this, you'll notice a lot of people do a lot of different things. This works for me, so that's how I share my recipe. So you'll see as you stir this, the flour starts coming away from the side of the bowl, and you want to add more. And when you get enough flour into this that it starts pulling away and it's not so sticky, that's when we'll put it out on our board and we'll knead it. So when you're making bread, there's basically 3 action steps and then 3 wait periods. And we've already done 1 action step of feeding our starter. This is our 2nd action step. After we fed the starter, we waited 4 to 8 hours. So this is pulling away nicely. And if you were using a wooden spoon or something, you would work a lot harder than you are with this Danish whisk if you've ever used a wooden spoon to make bread. I'm just going to give this a little more flour to keep it from sticking. So you can feed starter every day, you can make bread every day, but in our busy lives we may not be able to do that. So the minimum is to feed your starter at least once every 7 days, but don't ever throw out starter. I have been known to go on vacation and come back, and if I feed it every day, it revives. I don't know that you can kill starter, really kill it. Oh, you probably could, but. So if it gets forgotten in the back of your refrigerator, don't throw it away, just start feeding it. It'll revive. It's pretty forgiving. Pretty amazing stuff. So we're now to the point that we're going to knead the bread. Oh, it's nice and warm to the touch. This just feels so great. You're going to love this part of bread making. In this bowl, which is where our bread's going to go for its first proof, I have about a tablespoon of olive oil. You could use avocado oil. The oil is just a dab so that our bread doesn't stick to the glass bowl. So we're just bringing in the sides, pushing it down. I've actually taught grandsons and granddaughters how to make this bread. You can do it. So this is looking really nice. It's taking in more flour. This is going to make a lovely loaf of bread. Okay, so we're going to get this ready to go into our bowl, and we want to make a nice round loaf, so tucking it in. Call this the belly of the bread. That's the part that's going into the oil. We're going to put the belly down into the oil and make sure that it gets nice and coated. Then we're going to turn it over. Spread that oil around. Tuck in the edges. And this is beginning another wait period. Then I'm going to cover it with wax paper. This wax paper, if you tuck it in nice and tight, will keep it from drying out, because anything that dries out, it's not going to rise. The yeast will die in that part of it. So if you're at home and it happens to rise and you see the papers off of it, just give it a little tuck again. And in 8 hours, you'll be ready for the next step. Okay, so this has had 8 hours to rise from its first proof. It's nice and bubbly. I'm going to add a little flour to this so it comes away from the bowl. So the purpose of this step is to get all the bubbles out, and then doing that, it's going to spread the yeast throughout the dough. So we don't want the yeast trapped in bubbles, that we want to actually give the bread its opportunity to be nice and tall. So I'm going to put it on the board. And this feels really nice. It's so smooth and soft, like a baby's belly. So we're, like I said, working the bubbles out. So I like to pinch it. I can feel the bubbles pop as I pinch it with my hands. Then I'm going to give it a little more kneading. See how nice that is? Nice and smooth. Smooth as a baby's butt. All right, so we've got it into our brat form. Now, brat is another name for bread in German. So this is the bread form. Nothing to be intimidated about. The lines in this floured brat form are going to make beautiful marks in our bread, because we're going to turn it upside down into our lodge pot to bake it. But it has to have a waiting period. This can wait 3 to 5 hours. If you're in a hurry and it hasn't risen much, go ahead and bake it. It may just surprise you and rise up. I've been known to have that happen. Oh, and you know something I want to tell you? Our lives are busy. So if you need to speed this up, turn on your oven light, leave the door open, let it sit there. If it's like, oh, I can't bake this, I've got this tonight and that tomorrow, put it in the refrigerator. Refrigerator always slows down the processes. The heat always speeds it up. So you can make it fit into your life. So now we are at the place where we're going to bake the bread. It's an exciting time. I have preheated my oven at 450 degrees, really hot. This has been in there for 30 minutes, so it's nice and hot. It's like a pizza oven. When I open the lid, I'm going to drop my bread into, and you'll see how that's done. Then I'll put the lid back on it. I'll put it in the oven for 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And then I'll take the lid off and I'll finish browning it for the last few minutes. So this is extremely hot. This step, don't let it be intimidating. Sometimes the bread doesn't drop out of the broth form like you want it to. We'll see how it does today. It's been floured really well, so it should drop out, but sometimes it doesn't. I've had this stick to the brat form, and if that happens to you, just pull the bread off, toss it on top. It's amazing the pretty design it makes. Isn't nature great? So it's dropping. It's still a little bit stuck. We're going to help it along here. There we go. See the pretty lines in the bread? Now when this rises up, it should break open. I'm going to put the lid on, set the timer for 20 minutes, take the lid off, and let it brown for 5 to 7 minutes. Let's see if it breaks open like it's supposed to. Oh, it's so exciting. This is the moment of truth. Before I lift the lid, I'm reminding myself I love saving perfection for eternity. We're going to open the lid and see what we've got. Oh, it looks pretty good. It broke open. It's looking good. It's going to go in without the lid for 5 minutes. So you can see it's a little browned on the tips. You may like it more brown. So if you do, just keep watching it. And I'm loosening it from its grip there. I'm going to spill it out onto this board. So this is pretty good because it's not dark on the bottom. And I cover it, not all the way, just kind of give it a little blanket, and then it can cool there. But if you're like me, who can wait? Let's see what we've got. Now bear in mind, if you cut into it this early, it may not be totally baked because it'll continue to bake a little bit as it cools. But there's nothing like warm sourdough bread with butter melted into it. So let's see if we can get a nice little sliver of bread. This is going to be crusty on the outside. It's going to be yummy, yummy, yummy. Now see the crumb? Those holes? It's a nice crumb we've got going there. This is nice Kerrygold butter. Should we add a little jam or should we do honey? I'm going to try some strawberry jam. Aren't you proud of yourself? I am. So good. I'm so glad you joined me today making sourdough bread. Wasn't it worth it? Be patient with the process. You can be successful.